The radio crackled to life at 2:47 a.m., jolting Sergeant Claire Dunham from her patrol log paperwork. She'd been manning the main gate at Redstone Arsenal for 6 hours, watching empty Alabama highways stretch into darkness while military contractors and late-shift personnel trickled through the checkpoint. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she didn't mind night duty. It was quiet, predictable, and nobody bothered her with questions about why a 31-year-old woman with 2 Iraq deployments was still pulling gate shifts instead of training recruits. "Dunham, this is Lieutenant Hall. Report to Building 47 for equipment inspection. Bring your sidearm and radio silence protocol." Claire frowned at the radio. Building 47 was a supply warehouse on the far side of the base. Equipment inspections didn't happen at 3 in the morning, and radio silence protocol was reserved for classified operations. But Lieutenant Jared Hall was her commanding officer, and orders were orders, even when they made no sense. She signed out with the duty sergeant and drove her patrol vehicle across the empty base, past darkened barracks and administrative buildings. Building 47 sat isolated near the perimeter fence, a concrete block structure surrounded by loading docks and emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows across the asphalt. Lieutenant Hall was waiting beside his personal vehicle, not in uniform but wearing civilian clothes that reeked of alcohol. He was a big man, 6'3", with a kind of build that came from college football and protein supplements, not military conditioning. His family connections had fast-tracked his commission, and everyone knew he treated his assignment at Redstone like a stepping stone to bigger things. "You're late, Sergeant," he said, though Claire had made the drive in record time. "Sir, you said equipment inspection. What equipment are we?" "Inside." He gestured toward the warehouse with his key card. "Routine check on some sensitive materials. Need an MP witness for the paperwork." The warehouse was dark except for a few security lights near the entrance. Rows of metal shelving stretched back into shadows, filled with supplies and equipment Claire couldn't identify in the dim light. Hall walked ahead of her, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "You know, Dunham," he said without turning around, "I've been watching your performance reviews. 2 deployments, clean record, no disciplinary actions, but no advancement either. I'm satisfied with my current position, sir. Are you?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the weak light, his face looked different, harder, more predatory. "Because I see a woman who's hit her ceiling. Military police is fine for keeping drunk soldiers in line, but it's not a real combat role. You're playing dress-up in a man's uniform." Claire's hand moved instinctively toward her radio, but Hall stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Here's the thing about women in the military," he continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're always going to be outsiders, always going to be dependent on men like me for protection, advancement, everything that matters." He reached out and touched her arm, his fingers lingering on her sleeve. "But I'm not unreasonable. I could make things easier for you here. Better assignments, recommendations for promotion, protection from the kind of problems that make careers disappear. All it would take is a little cooperation." Claire jerked her arm away and took 2 steps back. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." His smile was cold and patient. "Just a simple transaction. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Or ... He shrugged. "I could make your life very difficult. Transfer requests that get lost, fitness reports that mention attitude problems, medical evaluations that find you unfit for duty. Your choice." Claire's training kicked in. Assess the threat, control the situation, document everything. But this wasn't a textbook scenario. This was her commanding officer in a military facility, with her career and possibly her safety hanging in the balance. I need to get back to my post, sir. You need to think about what I've said. And Sergeant? He stepped aside to let her pass. This conversation never happened. Officially, we conducted a routine inspection and found everything in order. Understood? Claire nodded and walked quickly toward the exit, her skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. Outside, she sat in her patrol vehicle for 5 minutes, hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. Back at the gate, she pulled out an incident report form and began writing. Attempted sexual harassment by commanding officer. Inappropriate contact. Implied quid pro quo arrangement. She documented everything. The time, location, exact words she could remember. By morning shift change, the report had vanished from her duty sergeant's desk. Sergeant Dunham, please have a seat. Captain Morrison's office was decorated with commendation certificates and photographs of him with various military dignitaries. He was a career officer, the kind of man who'd climbed the ranks through careful politics and strategic friendships, rather than battlefield heroics. I understand you've made some allegations about Lieutenant Hall? Claire sat at attention. Yes, sir. I filed an incident report about inappropriate conduct during a duty assignment. I see. Morrison opened a file folder and frowned at its contents. The thing is, Sergeant, there's no record of any special assignment last night. Lieutenant Hall was off duty, and according to your gate log, you remained at your post all evening. Sir, that's not accurate. I received radio orders to... I've reviewed the radio logs. No such transmission appears in our records. Claire felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. Sir, Lieutenant Hall ordered me to Building 47 for an equipment inspection. He was intoxicated and made inappropriate advances. Captain Morrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Sergeant, Lieutenant Hall comes from a distinguished military family. His father is Colonel James Hall, currently serving in the Pentagon. These are serious allegations you're making. Sir, I'm reporting what happened. What you believe happened. Morrison's tone was gentle but firm. I'm going to arrange for you to speak with our base psychologist. Combat deployments can create lasting stress, and sometimes that stress manifests in misperceptions. Sir, I know what I experienced. I'm sure you do. But perception and reality don't always align, especially when someone is dealing with the pressures of military service. Dr. Reynolds will help us sort this out. Dr. James Reynolds had a kind face and a soothing voice that probably worked well with genuinely traumatized soldiers. His office was designed to put people at ease. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, motivational posters about resilience and healing. Sergeant Dunham, I understand you've been having some difficult experiences lately. I reported a sexual harassment incident. That's not a difficult experience, it's a crime. Of course. But let's talk about context. You've served 2 deployments in Iraq, is that correct? Combat zones can create long-term stress that manifests in unexpected ways. Claire realized where this was heading. Doctor, my mental health is fine. I reported a specific incident with a specific officer. I'm sure you believe that. But consider this. You're a single woman in a male-dominated environment. You've experienced combat stress. You work night shifts, which can disrupt sleep cycles and affect judgment. Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted a normal interaction? He touched me without permission and propositioned me for sexual favors in exchange for career advancement. Dr. Reynolds made a note on his pad. You say he touched you. Where exactly? He put his hand on my arm. On your arm, And this felt sexual to you? Claire stared at him. In context, yes. I see. And these alleged sexual propositions. Can you be specific about what was said? Claire repeated Hall's words as precisely as she could remember them. Dr. Reynolds nodded and continued writing. Sergeant, what you're describing could be interpreted as normal mentorship conversation. A senior officer discussing career advancement, offering guidance and support. Is it possible your perception was colored by stress and fatigue? Are you suggesting I imagined this? I'm suggesting that trauma can affect how we process normal social interactions. I'd like to recommend a temporary duty reassignment while we work through these issues. Word traveled fast on a military base. By the end of the week, Claire noticed the changes. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room, sideways glances in the mess hall, the subtle but unmistakable signs that she'd been marked as a problem. Heard you had a little breakdown, said Corporal Jenkins, a supply clerk who'd never shown her anything but professional courtesy before. Stress can really mess with your head, you know. At PT formation, her usual running partner suddenly had other obligations. Her requests for overtime shifts were denied without explanation. Small things, but they added up to a clear message. You don't belong here anymore. The isolation might have broken her, if not for Private First Class Maria Reyes. Reyes was 19, fresh out of basic training, assigned to the motor pool where she maintained vehicles and tried to avoid attention. She was small, quiet, the kind of soldier who did her job and stayed invisible. She approached Claire after evening chow, when the mess hall was nearly empty. Sergeant, can I speak with you privately? They walked outside to a picnic table near the recreational area. Reyes kept looking around, making sure they weren't being observed. I heard what happened with Lieutenant Hall, she said quietly. Nothing happened. According to the official record. I know, but I heard what you said happened, and I believe you. Claire studied the young woman's face. Why? Because he did it to me too. 2 months ago, different place, same setup. Late night, isolated location, no witnesses. Reyes's voice was barely above a whisper. He said if I reported it, he'd have me transferred to a combat unit in Afghanistan. Said he had friends who could make sure I got the most dangerous assignments. Claire felt something cold settle in her stomach. Did you report it? I tried. Talked to my squad leader. He said Lieutenant Hall was just being friendly, trying to help me adjust to military life. Said maybe I was misunderstanding normal mentorship because I was young and inexperienced. And you dropped it? What choice did I have? I'm 19 years old with no family, no college education, nowhere else to go. The military is all I have. They sat in silence for a moment, watching fireflies blink in the Alabama twilight. How many others? Claire asked. I don't know, but I've heard rumors. Women who got transferred suddenly, women who had psychological evaluations, women who just left. The next morning, Claire was called to Captain Morrison's office again. This time, he wasn't alone. Lieutenant Hall sat in the corner chair, looking relaxed and confident in his pressed uniform. Sergeant, we need to discuss your future here at Redstone, Morrison began. Dr. Reynolds has expressed concerns about your mental stability. Combined with your recent allegations against Lieutenant Hall, we're considering options for your continued service. What kind of options, sir? Medical discharge would be the cleanest solution. PTSD is nothing to be ashamed of, and there are excellent civilian treatment programs. Claire looked at Hall, who met her gaze with cool indifference. He wasn't gloating or threatening. He didn't need to. The system was doing his work for him. "Sir, I'd like to request a transfer to another base." "I'm afraid that's not possible. Your psychological evaluation indicates you're not suitable for reassignment at this time." "Then I'd like to speak with someone outside the chain of command." Morrison and Hall exchanged a glance. "Sergeant, that would be highly irregular. Internal matters should be resolved internally." "Sir, with respect, the internal process has failed. The internal process has protected you from making a career-ending mistake," Morrison said, his tone growing sharper. "Lieutenant Hall has graciously agreed not to file charges for false accusations against a superior officer. I suggest you accept that generosity and move forward constructively." Claire realized she was trapped. Hall had connections that reached beyond the base. Morrison was either complicit or simply protecting his own interests. The entire system was designed to protect men like them and eliminate problems like her, but she wasn't done fighting. Claire spent her off-duty hours at the base library, researching regulations and procedures she'd never needed to know as a military police officer. She learned about the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, about congressional inquiries, about civilian oversight of military justice. She also started documenting everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every subtle form of retaliation. She kept detailed logs of who said what, when, and where. She photographed her performance evaluations, her duty assignments, any official correspondence. Most importantly, she reached out to other women on the base. Not directly, that would have been too dangerous for them, but through careful conversations and mutual acquaintances. She learned that Reyes wasn't the only one. There was a pattern going back 3 years. Young women, isolated incidents, reports that disappeared or were dismissed, transfers and discharges that removed potential witnesses. After 6 weeks of preparation, Claire took leave and drove to Montgomery. She'd found the office of a civilian attorney who specialized in military justice cases, a former JAG officer who'd gone into private practice after becoming disillusioned with the system she'd once served. Sarah Chen was tough, methodical, and skeptical of everything. She listened to Claire's story without interruption, taking notes and asking pointed questions about evidence and documentation. "You understand this will destroy your military career?" Chen said finally. "My military career is already over. This is about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. It will happen to other people. Men like Hall don't change, and systems like this don't reform themselves. The best we can hope for is justice in your specific case." That's enough. Chen filed a complaint with the Department of Defense Inspector General, bypassing the base chain of command entirely. She also contacted a journalist who covered military affairs for a national newspaper. Within 72 hours, Claire was relieved of duty pending investigation. The backlash was swift and brutal. Someone leaked her psychological evaluation to the base rumor mill. Her personal belongings were searched 3 times in 2 weeks for security violations. She received anonymous phone calls at all hours, some threatening, others just breathing. But she also received support from unexpected sources. A senior non-commissioned officer who'd served with her in Iraq wrote a character reference. 2 female officers from other units provided statements about their own experiences with Hall. Even some male soldiers expressed private support, though none were willing to go on record. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Claire lived off base in a rented room, officially suspended, but unofficially exiled. She wasn't allowed on base except for scheduled meetings with investigators. Her friends stopped calling. Her career was effectively over regardless of the investigation's outcome. The final report was classified, but Chen managed to get a summary through legal channels. Lieutenant Hall was quietly transferred to a desk job in Colorado. No criminal charges were filed, but he would never command troops again. 3 other officers received letters of reprimand for mishandling complaints. Captain Morrison was reassigned to a logistics position. Claire was offered a choice: accept an honorable discharge with full benefits, or face a court-martial for making false accusations against a superior officer. She took the discharge. On her last day, she cleaned out her locker in the MP station, where she'd worked for 2 years. Most of her colleagues avoided her, but a few offered awkward goodbyes and promises to stay in touch that they wouldn't keep. As she carried her belongings to her car, she found an envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. No name, no signature, just a brief note written in careful block letters. "You opened the door. We're not alone anymore." Claire folded the note and put it in her pocket. She'd lost her career, her friends, her identity as a soldier. But somewhere on the base, women she'd never met knew that someone had stood up and fought back. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. She drove through the main gate one last time, past the checkpoint where she'd spent so many quiet nights, past the buildings where she'd served her country with honor, until her country decided she was expendable. In her rearview mirror, Redstone Arsenal grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Just another military installation in Alabama, where nothing important had ever happened and no one had ever spoken up about injustice. But Claire Dunham knew better. She'd spoken up, she'd been heard, and sometimes, in a system designed to silence truth, being heard was the only victory possible. 6 months later, she would read in the Army Times about new policies for handling sexual harassment complaints. The article mentioned reforms and improved procedures, but no specific incidents that had prompted the changes. Nobody heard about what had happened at Redstone Arsenal, but everybody would benefit from the fact that one sergeant had refused to stay silent, even when silence would have saved her career. Sometimes that's how justice works. Quietly, slowly, through the accumulated courage of people who choose truth over comfort and principle over security. Claire never wore a uniform again, but she slept better at night knowing she'd served her country's values when serving its institutions became impossible.